Invigor Book and Buy ends November 14th. Run, don't walk to invigorbookandbuy.ca to find out how to get $30 off per bag. Terms and conditions apply.
Shaun Haney here with Real Agriculture. We're continuing our journey interviewing and talking to the really fabulous class of 2025 inductees into the Canadian Agricultural Hall of Fame. And our next discussion is with John Anderson, who is with the Oppenheimer Group, which is better known as Oppy. How are we doing today, John?
Fantastic. Thanks, Shaun. Great to meet you and great to be with you here today.
Yeah, and hey, congratulations. This
Thank you.
what an
It's a
honor.
great honor.
That's pretty cool.
Super honor. Yeah, I'm excited about it. Looking forward to the ceremonies here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and it's close to home because it's in Victoria, if I'm not mistaken. So
Correct.
you're close.
Yep, I got lucky with that one.
So I guess the first time you and I have talked, tell me a little bit about yourself and what the company does in the agricultural sector.
Sure. So the Oppenheimer Group is in the fresh fruit and vegetable industry. So headquartered in Vancouver, Canada, but have offices in 18 countries around the world. Source products from 30 countries around the world, and sell product into a dozen different countries around the world.
Wow.
And so, yeah, all fresh fruit and vegetables. That's the line of industry we're in. And we grow, market, sell, and distribute the products. So in some cases, we're the grower. Some cases, we help the grower. We have our own bank. We're a financial institution helping growers around the world finance their crops, get their crops grown, and get their crops to market. And then we bring them in here. We repack them, regrade them, put them into whatever pack type or that either one of the retailers would like to have. We sell to retail, wholesale, food service, and institutions.
That's
So about
incredible.
1,150 customers we have.
That's incredible. Okay, so now before we started recording, did you say you've been with the company 50 years? Is that what you said?
That is correct. Yeah, as of March 15th of this year, I was 50 years with Oppy.
When you started, when you were, of course, like 2 years old,
I think a
what?
little younger than that. They were robbing the cradle back then, right?
Yeah. When you first started, what did the company look like compared to where it is today?
Good question. So the company's 165 years old. But when I started it, it used to be grocery and produce. So I started obviously in the produce division. And back in those days in 1975, when I started, they had one office and their total gross sales were $7 million. And the other grocery business was on the side is no longer actually operating any longer. And so I started at the single office and 7 million in sales and opened our first operations and sales into the United States and brought some of our first products out of Chile and New Zealand to start expanding our marketplace. And so today, 18 offices, 30 countries we source product from, over 50 million cases of product, which is several billion servings. Yeah, so it's been a bit of a travel around the world bit,
How many days?
building relationships.
Yeah, how many days a year are you on the road?
That's a good question. It used to be about more than 60% of the year. Now it's probably, as I've gotten to be bigger and all over the place, it's probably like 40%.
Okay. Wow. Okay, so as you reflect on being in this year's inductee class, what does it mean to you personally to be inducted into the Canadian Agricultural Hall of Fame?
I mean, it's obviously a huge honor. Something I didn't even know much about till a couple of years ago. And so for me to be recognized in a state like that really kind of looks back and say, hey, you know what? I guess some of the things I did might have been right. And nice that you get recognized for giving back to society and the community in which you operate in. It really makes me feel like I've accomplished something and maybe I've made a difference.
How did you end up in this segment of the industry? Was this on purpose, on accident? How did you get started?
Yeah, definitely on accident. So when I was a younger kid, I first started with a paper route when I was 9, 10 years old. I did the most of the morning and the evening paper routes. And then I had a job at a winter club when I was 14 in maintenance. And then I got a job up Grouse Mountain, a ski resort when I was 50. And then I was starting to save money up to learn how to fly. So by the time I had my private pilot's license before I had my driver's license.
Hmm.
And then I got my commercial license by the time I was 16. And so what happened was I ended up, my dad was a chairman of a skating committee. And I mentioned to you, I did some work at the Winter Club and helping them set up facades and things when they had carnivals. And there was a strike on. Safeway had gone on strike. And the guys at Oppenheimer had I guess, a bunch of rail cars and things that had come in and they needed to get them unloaded before they got pulled away again. So he called up my dad and said, can your son come and unload this 50-foot rail car full of cabbage and 2 feet of ice? And so he volunteered me. And so I went out there and did that, gave me a hip waders and a shovel and said, go tour. And that's where I started, in the warehouse. And they offered me a job in the warehouse after I did what I did with the 50-foot car. Then started out loading 100-pound sacks of potatoes and in the other warehouse there, 50-pound sacks of salt. So I got there. Then I was there for about, I guess, a year and a half, and they said, would you be interested in a sales job? And I said, sounds interesting. It sounds challenging. I said, but I'm going to be an airline pilot, so I can't guarantee that I'm going to stay, but I will try it. So then I went into sales. Then I went into category management, and then I was given the challenge of building New Zealand kiwi fruit and apples in North America. Back in those days, I think they were just coming out of being called Chinese gooseberries.
Right.
And there was Granny Smith apples. So it was like building something from the ground up. And so that's where I kind of got integrated into that. And then I've been there for I think about 5, 6 years. And the airline was calling. Actually, it was those days they interviewed me for a pilot's job. I had to make a decision whether I was going to take that job or not. And then I was approached by my wife was in a secretary in an investment business, and these guys were in the mining business, and they wanted to buy an airplane and have someone manage it and charter it out for them when they weren't using it. So I started up an airline and started the airline from scratch. And that airline still exists today. It's been in business for 45 years. We now operate 10 jets and 2 helicopters, traveling and flying around the world. But what happened to someone then at that point in time, they said to me, I said, geez, I want to fly, but I really love this business. Because when I took about a 6-month leave of absence from the business to start the airline, and then I was getting calls from the growers in New Zealand saying, we really need you back. Because I certainly started to produce, into more customers into the United States than what we'd had just in Canada and Eastern Canada, et cetera. So someone said to me one day, well, why can't you do both? And so I said, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe, why can't I do both?
And that's kind of at a time where there was flexibility like that, I'm going to kind of assume probably on work flexibility like that was not very common.
Probably true. Yeah, probably true.
Yeah.
But they, I guess they looked at it and said, hey, he's a hard worker. And if he wants to try to do this, see if we can get him back. And it worked out for me and for them. And then in the early 80s, I became a partner in the company. They offered me some shares in the company, and then we started an employee ownership group.
Yep.
That I was CEO and chair of that group, and that expanded out. I think today we have about 45 or 50 employees that are shareholders in the company as well, in addition to the other shareholders. And so
curious, John, who were some of those early influences or mentors that had a real impact? And it can be early or it could be throughout your career.
Sure. David Oppenheimer, he was the first, his family was first, he was first officially elected mayor of the city of Vancouver. Not him, but he was the grandson of that group. And I say officially elected mayor because back in the day when the first mayoral election was going on, there was some ballots counted and there was a dispute as to who the winner was because one of the candidates had brought a busload of people up from Seattle to vote. And so while they were going through this dispute, the city burnt down, city of Vancouver. And so they said, well, David Oppenheimer said, look, right now it shows as if you're the mayor, so we're going to appoint you for 1 year and we'll have another election. So the next year they had another election and David won with a landslide. So he's the first officially elected mayor of the city. The statue's in Stanley Park, and he was responsible for setting aside Stanley Park and also putting a lot of the infrastructure in Vancouver in place. So some pretty cool people from the past. And David Oppenheimer, the grandson who I worked for initially, he was really a great guy. He was a people person. He cared about people. He had already back in those days, he was giving bonuses and profit share out to his staff. And we're talking 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That was not normal. And so David would always tip when he went in those days to restaurants, to people, and he would always instill in me that you have to do the right thing. You have to work really hard. Just remember, all the people along the way you rely on, without them, you can't be successful. So he was a mentor to me from that perspective, and I've kind of kept that mandate going forward for all my career.
Powerful. So I'm curious, how have you seen the sector change over your time period?
Hugely. You know, back in those days, things were seasonal, right? You might get grapes for a few months of the year, and they might get stone fruit for a few months of the year. You might get cherries once in a while. Citrus wasn't around on a year-round basis. Greenhouse products like peppers and tomatoes and cucumbers weren't available on a year-round basis. So what started to happen is we opened up into more areas. We were able to fill in that void and bring more products year-round to the grocery store, which was healthier for the consumer. Obviously, great additional sales for the grocery people, and it allowed us to extend our business. So in doing that, we had to go abroad and outside of just Canada and outside the United States into Central America and South America, Australia, New Zealand, China, South Africa, Spain, all kinds of different places around the world to start getting products. And then as things went along, the ability to bring those things into the country through the governments allowing that importation of it allowed us to keep growing our business. And so that's really what really matters. Changed. And if you think about it today, some of the things we brought in those days, like a navel orange, isn't nearly as popular today as an easy peeler, like a mandarin, because it's convenient, right? So people want convenience. And then we had green apples, Granny Smith apples, and now look at the apples you have today, the multitude of different flavors, and the different grapes we have today compared to the grapes we have back in the past, right? So much bigger grapes, sweeter, crisper, juicier, better flavor. Look at the greenhouse industries come from. We were probably one of the first ones I know in British Columbia and Victoria in the 1950s to start with a greenhouse. And there was peppers and cukes. Well, compared to the peppers and cukes and things you grow in greenhouses and tomatoes today, and look at the size of that industry in Canada. It's huge.
Yeah.
Like hundreds and thousands of acres of greenhouse glass. So it's changed dramatically. And we've gotten into having to get into the finance business to help these growers around the world be able to, because they all can't always get enough bank financing to get their crops off the ground, shipped to us, wait for the time that we can sell it and return cash back to them again. So that happened, and then so we get more involved in the growing in terms of, and then the food safety aspect of things that started to come into it. We had to make sure everything's food safe. And then we had to get major IT systems in place that we actually built ourselves internally to fit the produce industry, because we needed to make sure we could track that product from where it's grown in the field to where it finally ends up in the retailer's distribution center. And if there was ever a food safety issue, we had to be able to track it and trace it down to where it was from and narrow that down within 24 hours.
Yeah. Like, I think for a lot of people, there is an intensity to this part of the industry where the growing of produce is very intense. It's highly managed. It is different than, say, growing a field of canola or lentils.
Definitely.
It is much different. So there's the intensity of that. Then there's the TLC at something like harvest that is a little bit different than some other commodities that are grown. And so, like, bruising of an apple, right? Like, that causes financial problems for the grower, and you don't want it. Then there's, like, because you're dealing globally, as you mentioned, like, it was just a seasonal business. Then we discovered the value of a contra season. And so it's a 12-month round the clock sort of business. It's global. There's a logistical component to that is a little bit mind blowing. when we think about that as well. And it's a really perishable good. That's the
Correct.
other part of it. It's not, you're not manufacturing a car where it goes, you produce it and it sits on a lot. This is a very complex system that you're running here.
Yeah, this stuff doesn't get better with age.
Right.
It's got to be
Yes.
moved, right? Yeah, and every crop is different because the weather around the world has impacts on our crops. And so a crop you might have had in Chile last year is completely different than a crop grapes you had in Chile this year.
Yeah.
And same with locally. Something that you had tomato crop this year versus tomato crop next year, completely different. And so, you had to make sure you have all those checks and balances in place and the ability to, if, the product has not got good shelf life, you got to be able to promote it and move it quickly.
Yeah. It's very, very fascinating. I,
And
I
you're talking
guess,
like ship loads. I mean, I'm talking freighter loads of product.
right. Yeah. We're not just talking like putting it in it's not just in a dry van. Like we're talking serious
Refrigerated
volume.
ships. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. The you had mentioned like the IT systems and stuff like that. That's something that I'm sure you have seen a huge evolution, and I can't even imagine where artificial intelligence and robotics and autonomy is taking us in the future in that regard.
No question about it. Honestly, our system, a proprietary system that we have, has probably been a competitive advantage for us. There's not any in the industry that can kind of do what we do. And because we're multi-producted, a lot of our competitors might have one or two products. We have like 150 different pack types. And so this system of being able to have the inventory available for the sales group as to where it is and the quality control group, like we have our own quality control people. A lot of other customers or competitors have outside third party quality control people. No, we have people inside of our warehouses, inside of the warehouses of the places we import the product, and in the fields where the product's being picked and packed, to make sure that we're lining up the right product to get to the right retailer who wants the right type of product in the right type of pack on the timing in which they wish it. And so there's always constantly reforecasting and relooking at things every week as to what things might look out 3 weeks from now. And you're making commitments to retail, you know, months in advance.
Yeah. Curious, is there's a lot of talk about Canadian competitiveness right now and what nation building, what Canada needs to do. In your sector, is Canada competitive? Like is obviously winter's a challenge. We're not growing
Sure.
produce year round, but are we competitive in the sector?
It depends on the time of the season, I guess I would say, and also the product. Each
Yeah.
product is different. And it depends upon whether the crop is short or the crop is long. But generally, overall, because we have an advantage with our dollar being weaker, for us to export product out of Canada to the US gives us an advantage, especially in the greenhouse area. The apples and pears and cherries, things like that are really highly perishable. We got some good seasonality there, which is competitive, but we got to be careful about the fact that we don't make our productivity and our wages are a struggle right now.
Mm,
If we didn't have that, honestly, if we did not have that US dollar disadvantage or an advantage to us, I
yeah,
think we'd be struggling to compete.
that makes sense. Is that one of your big concerns, or are there other concerns about like? And I want to ask you about what you're optimistic about going forward. I don't mean to, and what the opportunities are, but I don't want to stay in the negative. But while we're here, are there other concerns about the future of the industry?
Sure, yeah. I mean, you've heard about the tariffs.
Yeah.
So we're in 30 countries, and this bunch of tariffs been put on a lot of different countries, and so we have to adapt to that quite quickly. You have to have systems in place to track it. And then you have to be able to see how much can you pass out onto the marketplace versus how much the grower takes, how much the retailer takes, how much you. So that's been a big challenge, and the fact that it's changing so quickly. Um,
Right.
um, just, I mean, part of the things that we try to do. I mean, I was chairman of the International Fresh Produce Association recently, and last March I was in Trump's office in the White House, and we were talking to them about agriculture, and they were talking to us about their goals in agriculture. And this was just before he announced all the tariffs, I think on April the 2nd. This was March, I think 21st, something around there, that area.
Yep.
And so they asked us, they said, is there any requests you have of us. So we want to increase our trade, is what they said to us, not decrease it. We have had no new trade deals in the last 4 years. We want more trade deals. And to be honest with you, they said we don't want any tariffs, but we're tariffed all around the world, and we're going to have to make a big splash and get people to pay attention to us because we're being tariffed in some areas that we don't think is fair. And I said, okay. I said, that's fine. And I said, well, I think I might be able to help you with a little bit of that. And they said, well, how so? I said, well, I think you want to make America healthy again. And they said, yes, we do. I said, well, I think you also want to keep grocery prices down. And they said, yes, we do. I said, well, I'd suggest that you recommend to the president that the USMCA that he negotiated, that he remains leaving in place until such time has been renegotiated. Now, why is that? I said, because there's no duty on fresh fruit and vegetables between Canada, Mexico, and the United States under that agreement. And so they said to me, we will make that recommendation to the president. And on the day that he stood up at the podium there, they texted to say, you're going to get your wish. So we have to be concerned about those kind of things as well and be involved in trying to figure out how we make sure. And they did say, can you please, then, as we renegotiate this new USMCA, would you guys be open to giving us suggestions on what has been going right and not been going right from our perspective?
Yeah. I don't know how you would keep track of all of the tariffs that are on, they're off, and trying to manage all that. I'm, as somebody that's in media, it's hard for me to keep track of it.
It's crazy
It really is. It's as clear as mud.
It's disruptive, and it's like, but you know what? We have to be, one of the things that I would say allow us to be successful in all this environment that we just talked about is you need to be adaptable.
Yeah.
Company, you need to have a culture that adapts to change and is adaptable to what's going on around you. Because of the perishable nature of our product, we have no choice. But now because I would call the perishable nature of what's going on in politics, it helps us adapt to it quicker, but it's still a challenge.
Okay, now give me the opportunities. We talked about some of the things that concern us, and let's get to the opportunities. What are some of the biggest opportunities for Canadian agriculture and your part of the sector?
Honestly, I mean, I really am optimistic about our product. I think our product is really a product that can help solve a lot of problems the world has today. I mean, look at health issues everywhere. What's the healthiest thing for you to eat? Fresh fruit and vegetables. So I see our sector having nothing but growth opportunities as people start to recognize that this is really something they got to really dig into. And I mean, what we're doing, and I'm optimistic about this with AI and with new varieties of product that we're scientifically researching and bringing online. Like we've got a new pink blueberry coming online, and we're growing lettuce in a warehouse that's stacked four stacks high, and no humans are touching it, and we use 90% less water. So there's just lots of things that we're doing in our industry, I think, to make it more efficient, because obviously people's concern about is costs, and we have to keep worrying about that. But I think that I'm optimistic that we are in a place that can help solve a lot of the problems the world has. Cost of healthcare is going through the roof.
Yeah.
And, with this one thing we can do, we're talking about produce prescriptions, the doctor prescribing people produce to help with their health. So I'm enthusiastic about, I think, where our industry has opportunities to go. And I think one of the things that happened to us in the past is we were, I think, fragmented as an industry. And we didn't have a big voice. And so in Canada now, the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, which I was chair of years ago, but have been on the board for many, many years, and I still chair the North American Trade Task Force that we started 20 some odd years ago between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. It's that we have opportunities here now to have a bigger voice. And as the chair of the IFPA, which down in the United States, two groups got together and became global, and that's why we got invited to the White House, is we now have one single voice that fights for fresh against a lot of the other really large institutions that have had a voice. And now we have a voice that we didn't have before.
Now, in that example, that voice is coming from all three countries then, unified?
Yes. I mean, obviously, this one is headquartered in Washington, D.C., but it is spread across all of Europe, South America, Central America, Asia, Canada. And so then we work together with those countries to bring a voice. So it's going to be what's going on in Canada. Like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I was a little concerned about when we had negotiated this with Trump and he had said he'll leave the USMCA in place. Unfortunately, Carney had made a decision to charge some duties on some produce items coming into Canada. And I said to the CPMA, I said, guys, you got to get to him and you got to tell him, please take those off as fast as you can, because unfortunately, if it's seen that we're violating the agreement, look out, it'll be nullified in a minute.
Yeah.
And so they wrote a letter to him, and then you saw September 1st, he took those off. So there's an example of it, and the other example of what we were able to do. And so what I said to the group, they had nothing in Europe, they had nothing in Asia, and so we're opening up groups in Asia and Europe to make sure that, like I said to them, look, a lot of things start in Europe, and they start with trends, and they start with regulations, and I said we need to be having a seat at the table to understand what those regulations are. If they're good, support them. If they're bad, tell them why they're bad. And then look at some of those trends so that we're prepared for them when they finally get here, and or at least we have a say in what comes.
Very, very fascinating. There's lots of different directions that I just want to continue to ask you about the industry, John. I want to circle it back a little bit to the focus on you. If you were able to have a meeting with the younger John Anderson, maybe that young buck that was unloading out of that rail car, what advice would you give him?
I wouldn't change a thing of what I did, because I think that the advice I gave him is you need to be hardworking. There is no substitute for hard work. You need to be forward looking, right? You have to listen to things that are being said around you. One of the things that for me, I would listen to what our customers had to say. And when I listened to what they had to say, then I said, we need to make this adoption, and then we make that adoption to accommodate what they're saying to us. Because if you don't, they're going to go do something different. And sometimes you're too busy, you don't listen to what's going on. And I'll give you an example of that. So remember I told you that I'd gotten us into the Chilean product and New Zealand product into Canada, and also into the United States, and then from the US into Canada. So I was fortunate to have a basket of goods to sell to a retailer. And he said to me, that's fine. I'll take a grapes, and I'll take some stone fruit, and give me some apples, and I'll take a kiwi fruit. And then I went, okay, that's okay. But I had to send him 4 invoices. He said, no. I need 1 invoice. I got to get a new system. I got to integrate everything, right? I've got to figure out how we can do this. And that's how we started with designing an IT system that suited us. And I can tell you today, and then I said to you earlier about change. There's over 350 requests in our IT department. We have like 22 people that work there, asking for adaptation and changes to our system to make things more efficient on a regular basis. And they are people. What I said when we started the system, I said I want our programmers to interface with our users, not somebody from India or some other place around the world. I want them to interface with the users and find out what they really want. And then once it's working, if there are any flaws or things in it, and get it fixed quickly, and on you go. So that's one of the other critical pieces that we adapted, and it exists today.
From a leadership standpoint, a lot of times we focus on leadership downwards, down the hierarchy of the business. We don't talk a lot about management upwards. As you rose through the ranks, there's a difference between the two, right?
Massive, yeah.
Yeah. So talk about your experience there. Yeah.
So this is an interesting one, because I did start at the very bottom, work out well at the top. So I saw the value in every person along the way. But one of the things that I really, really focused on, probably in the early 90s, which wasn't something that was even talked about back then, was culture. How do we develop a culture where when they go from one office to the other, I didn't want them to be John Andersons, but I want them to do what John Anderson suggested we do in their own way. But still, we want to be consistent. When you go to one location to another, you want to be consistent. So adapting a culture was critical. And then I went around to all the offices and said, here's the culture I think we want. What do you guys think? And we developed it from there. And then we measure that culture every year. And I remember probably 5 or 6 years after I did that, I had gotten my executive together. We had started strategic planning way back then, which again wasn't done. And so we had a big session with all of our vice presidents, and we all decided what we're going to do. And then I said, okay, guys, you got to go out with that and implement it. Well, a year later, I'm going like, what happened? Half of it got implemented, half of it didn't. A lot of them were sort of, well, I got all the power, now I'm keeping it for my benefit. And so what I did is I said to the group, I said, guys, I have a problem here. We need to get information from the ground up as opposed to from you down as to what we're doing and how they're included. So I formed a group called the Champions of Change. And that group, none of them are senior leaders. They're all from every department in the company, from every office in the company, and they get together. We have an annual survey to all the staff that's unanimous that goes out. Information from that comes first to that group before I even get it. And they go through it all and say, here's the themes that we see inside of this, and here's the things we think you need to address. And then they present it to me. Then I take it to our executive at the executive strat plan session. And then I hold another session after that called the strategy implementation session, when I bring two people from the Champions of Change to present to that group what their findings were. And so then when I go on an office tour to every office in the company and present the strategic plan, and then sit down with all the staff and ask questions of me and see if there's any clarity or any suggestions they have. And we go forward, and then we measure it 6 months later to see how we're going. And then we have action plans every month that we continually look at, even though we're doing our management of every day. And really, honestly, what I hear from the champions, and what we'll do with the Champions of Change is, before they actually came to Vancouver and saw all the results of the survey, they also sit down with all of their people, say, I'm going to Vancouver, any suggestions you guys verbally can tell me about as a group, and they bring that in as well. And then so in the end, they see that the strategic plan that we put in place has input from the ground, very bottom up to the top, and they have a clear channel to me. And I don't hold the other people. I don't keep it from the other people. I just, guys, you're all included in this whole process. It's not something against you, but it's something to help us all. And that's been in place now probably for 25 years.
Well, and because of that process, it's easier for no matter where people are to grab ownership of it, right? Because it was inclusive.
Absolutely. Correct. 100%.
Yeah.
And so we've won lots of awards as one of Canada's best managed companies for about 25 years now. And Canada's most admired corporate cultures for 9 years running. So yeah, it's about making sure that, again, if the person that's picking that product isn't doing their job properly, I don't care how good I might be or the guys in sales might be, we're going to fail. So these people are all just as important as the next person, and I want them to understand and know and feel that. And so we have a profit sharing program that everybody in the company, warehouse, truck driver, whoever, share it.
What do you see as, we've got leaders listening to this interview. Some of them, run a family farm business. Some of them are, in the C-suite. Leadership takes a lot of forms. What do you see as one of the biggest mistake that leaders make from your experience in your career?
It's about them. It's not about you. It's about the people around you. Right? I think it's, yes, of course, you want to be successful. And yes, of course, you want things to be more positive for you in the future. But how you get there and how you do it, in my opinion, is through the strength of the people that are around you. And so, you need to be firm as a leader. No question about that. You can't be wishy-washy. You need to understand where you're going. You have to have a direction, and you have to have what I would call a flight plan on how to get there. And for me, I'm using my aviation background for that. But you take off from Vancouver going to Toronto, you don't always get direct to Toronto. You might fly at, let's do it 35,000 feet. You might be at 37 or 40, who knows? And you might deviate around a thunderstorm or there's traffic this way. You don't get directly to your destination. There's constant adjustments to it, but you do end up at your final destination. And so I think that's kind of how I look at how you run the business, is like Constantly, you have a plan, constant deviations against your plan, reforecasting it and communicating and bringing your flight crew along with you as you're making those adaptations.
I interviewed somebody previously, similar question, and they had an aviation background. They described it as, if you're flying, if you're leading as if it's just VFR, which is visual flight rules, where
Yeah,
the leader sees everything and they're directing. That's not the same as if you're IFR, which is what instrument flight rules, where you have to rely on what the dash is telling you and the gauges are telling you, relying on your people, right? There's a difference there.
that's correct. No question about it.
It's about as much as I know about aviation to enough to be dangerous, right there.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So the ceremony is coming up here very shortly. I've been to it before. It's an amazing, cool experience. There's people from across the Canadian agricultural sector. It's fabulous. And they're gonna, you're gonna be invited on stage, and they're gonna unveil your portrait. And I think you're gonna say a few words. So what do you think when they unveil that portrait, and it becomes really official, and you're in front of peers from across different parts of the agricultural sector across Canada, you've had a global impression in the produce industry, but obviously big impact on Canada. What do you think your reaction, your emotions are going to be?
I think I'll be very proud. I'll stand there very proud to be a Canadian and proud to be representing the produce industry at that level. And I kind of hope that the portrait makes me look younger than I am today.
I think you're doing pretty good, John. I think you're doing pretty good. If to finish up, I guess I asked you about the advice for your younger self. What about the advice for people that are thinking about getting into the sector? Now, that could be the produce sector. It could just be agriculture in general. I'm assuming you feel pretty strongly about its potential going forward, but what would you tell them?
I would tell them it's a really exciting industry, and there's so many dynamics to it. You could be in IT, you can be a grower, you can be a warehouseman, you can be a category manager, you can be a salesperson, you can be a merchandiser that markets. You can be an executive. There's people in the accounting side that are super important. You can be a banker. There's so many aspects to this industry and so many channels. I'll give you an example of a guy who used to work in the warehouse in Oppenheimer, and now he's one of our top IT guys. And one of the guys that was a quality control guy, he's a vice president. And the guy that's the president behind me was a sales assistant. So there's so many opportunities in my view, and so many different directions you can go in this industry that I think it's exciting for anybody who wants to get into it.
Cool. Well, John, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you. I'm glad this was a gateway for us to meet, me get a chance to chat with you. You've accomplished some great things in your career, and I don't think you're done yet, by the sounds of it.
No, not quite done yet. No.
That's good for you. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and once again, congratulations on being one of the inductees into the 2025 class of the Canadian Agricultural Hall of Fame. All the best to you.